Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry about the Zoom difficulties. I'm Dr. Justin Glisan. I'm the state climatologist of Iowa, and I work for the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, the Climatology Bureau. What we'll look at today are current conditions on the ground across the state and then spring outlooks moving forward for the growing season. The final part of our presentation will involve looking at our climatological outlooks, the temperature and precipitation behavior that we can expect both in the short term, but also out monthly and seasonally. While this product is not an outlook per se, it's what we call the quantitative precipitation forecast. So you see the forecast on the news in the morning or at night. What this is a summation of the expected precipitation over the next 7 days. So if you look at Iowa, we can expect anywhere from a quarter to half an inch in eastern Iowa, with amounts dropping off as we move west. Where you see those red colors across the southern United States is where the active storm track is. So they can expect a lot of precipitation from Louisiana all the way up the eastern seaboard. And now these maps are issued every morning, so it does give us good guidance moving into the next short-term 7-day period of where the highest amounts of precipitation will fall across the state and across the United States. So these can be used in conjunction with the short-term outlooks, which I'll show next, to give us an idea of windows in which we have favorable conditions in weather. Okay, so now we'll get into our outlook products. This is the 6 to 10 day outlook, and then again we have the 8 to 14 day outlook, which I'll show you next. One thing that we should discuss about outlooks are how they're developed. These are probabilistic products, so they're not telling us what the temperature will be or what precipitation pattern we can expect. What they are showing us is a probability of being above or below average. So on the left-hand side here, this is the product that's valid from April 12th through the 16th. And you see that big blue bullseye. So the darker the color on there, the higher the probability. So we're anywhere from an 80 to 90% chance of being below average within that time frame. Now it doesn't tell us how high or low the temperature will be. It just gives us a high probability of being below average. Wherever you see red on that map, that's where the temperature behavior has a higher probability of being above average. Again, so the darker the color, the higher the probability. So we do have a good expectation that we will have a cold snap at the end of the week moving into next week. The cold snap will have temperatures above freezing during the day, probably in the 50s, but we will have a few days in which temperatures will be below freezing. And these will impact perennials, the flowers that are blooming outside, shrubs that are blooming. Those might be impacted. So this gives us guidance that you can cover those up to protect them if the temperatures do go below freezing overnight. On the right-hand side here is the precipitation behavior. Wherever you see the greens, those are higher probabilities of wetter than normal conditions. Flip side, wherever you see the browns, higher probabilities of being drier than average. What you can see here is there's a tongue of dryness that's moving into the upper Midwest and into Iowa. So coupled with this cold probability is a drier than normal probability, which would be great, allowing for soils to continue to dry as we've been wet recently. So as with the 6 to 10 day outlook, here is the 8 to 14 day outlook. And this is valid April 14th through the 20th. So getting into the second half of April. What we're seeing here, again, the same signal as the 6 to 10, a higher probability of being colder than average, and then dry to near normal probabilities in terms of precipitation. I should mention that these outlooks are issued after or around 2 p.m. Central Time every day. On the weekends, the outlooks are generated automatically, meaning there is no human interactions with the outlook models or the analysis. So for those of you that look at these products each day, you'll sometimes notice weird behavior from Friday to Saturday and then Sunday to Monday. This is a relic of the human component of the outlooks during the week going to full automation on the weekends. So you can see a flip in behavior sometimes moving into the weekend or moving into the work week. And again, that's a function of going from human interaction with the Outlook models to no interaction on the weekend. Another useful product issued by the Climate Prediction Center revolves around hazards, whether it's temperature, winds, precipitation. This product is experimental, so it's not in full production yet, or it's not used as pure guidance. But what it's showing here is again looking at the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day outlook. This is giving us a risk of slight, moderate to high hazardous temperatures across the United States. And what you can see is between April 14th through the 16th, a moderate chance of hazardous temperatures, which we did see in the outlooks across all of Iowa. And then from the 14th to the 15th, that sliver of southwestern Iowa in which there's a high probability of having hazardous temperatures. And this time around, it's a cold snap. So again, these are linked in with our forecast and climate outlooks and give us good guidance in the short term when we're trying to make decisions, especially for field work and planting. A product that somewhat bridges the gap between the short-term outlooks and the monthly or even longer-term outlooks is this 3 to 4 week outlook. The current outlook is valid from April 18th through May 1st, so the end of the month, and these outlooks are generated every Friday afternoon, so every 7 days. These outlooks are based on departures from the 1981 through 2010 base period climatological decade. And these are two category outlooks that differ from the official current three category outlooks that we use for monthly and seasonal forecasts. The shading on the temperature map depicts the most favored category, either above normal, which is the A, or below normal, which is the B, with the solid lines giving the probability greater than 50% of this more likely category, so above or below average behavior. The shading on the precipitation map depicts the most favored category, either above median, which is the A, or below median B, with the solid lines giving the probability, again, greater than 50% of this more likely category occurring. So above average behavior or above or below normal behavior. In areas where the likelihoods of a 2-week mean temperature and accumulated precipitation amounts being similar to climatological probabilities, equal chances, or EC, is indicated. So what we're seeing on this map is a greater than 50% probability of being colder than average across the upper Midwest, including Iowa. And then looking at precipitation behavior, we have that brown bullseye. So indications that we will be drier than average moving out towards the end of the month. Now we'll look at the monthly outlooks produced by the Climate Prediction Center. Again, temperature on the left and precipitation on the right. But before we look at the April outlooks, I wanted to show a brief analysis of the March initial or half-month lead and the final outlooks issued at the end of February. The half-month lead product is issued on a Thursday, typically in the middle of the month, hence the phrasing half-month lead. The shading on this map is similar to the 3 to 4 week outlooks as EC is shown on the map. However, the probabilistic threshold begins at 33% for the most favored category. Most favored as above normal behavior, warmer and wetter, denoted with an A, to below average behavior, colder and drier, denoted as B. Where EC is shown, there is a 34% probability of climatological or near normal behavior. So what we saw initially in the half-month lead issued on 20 February 2020 for March is an indication of Slightly elevated chances of colder than normal behavior in southeastern Iowa, and then EC across the northern part of the state and upper Midwest. Looking at precipitation, we had that big brown bullseye of what was the expectation of higher probabilities of being drier than average. Now looking at the final March 2020 outlooks. Now, if we look at what actually happened in March 2020, again, on the left-hand side, temperature departure, right-hand side, precipitation departure. But this is the reality that happened from our National Weather Service co-op stations. So looking at the temperature field, we can see that the final March outlook actually did pretty well in showing us that there were higher probabilities of warmer than average conditions. And we are seeing that in the temperature field. Precipitation wise, yes, we are seeing that below average behavior, which is the yellows on this map. So drier than normal conditions where you see that light yellow, and then above average precipitation fell across Iowa, Missouri. So where we had EC and the guidance for the final March outlook, we kind of shifted that towards wetter conditions. Now, moving from the brown bullseye that we had in the half-month lead to EC suggests that something in the climate models that produce the outlooks was trending towards wetter than normal conditions, since we did move from higher probabilities of being drier than normal towards EC. So these are things that we should look at when we are considering the half-month lead versus the final month outlook that are produced. Okay, so now we will look at the April 2020 temperature and precipitation outlooks that were issued on the 31st of March. What we're seeing across the state in terms of temperature are elevated probabilities of warmer than normal conditions, and then EC kind of in that northwestern corner of the state. If we look at the precipitation probabilities, wherever you see green, those are elevated chances of being wetter than normal. If we went back to the half-month lead, the probabilities actually kind of diminished somewhat in terms of precipitation, but we're still seeing a dominant probability for wetter than normal conditions. And we've seen this consistently in some of our short-term outlooks over the past few weeks. Now, the Climate Prediction Center also issues seasonal forecasts. This is the half-month lead, April, May, June outlook, which was issued 19 March 2020. And what we've seen in these seasonal time slices has been a consistent message. Warmer than normal probabilities across much of the United States, but also higher probabilities of being wetter than average, as you can see on the right-hand side here with the green coloring. In the seasonal products that we've seen issued over the past month or two, again, the consistent signal has been wetter than average conditions. So if we look at May, June, July 2020, and this is 1.5 month lead. So this was also issued on 19 March 2020. Again, similar signals to the April, May, June outlook. Higher probabilities of warmer than normal conditions, but also higher probabilities of wetter than normal conditions. Now, moving into summer, this is kind of interesting because typically when we see warmer than normal conditions, those are tightly coupled, especially in summertime, with drier than normal conditions. On the flip side, when you see a signal for wetter than normal conditions moving into summer, those are also coupled with typically colder than average conditions. So we have an interesting behavior developing here in which we have higher probabilities of both warmer and wetter conditions. So we'll need to monitor this as we move forward, because as we've seen in our recent trends going back 20 to 30 years, typically moving into late June, early July is when the faucet turns off across the state. Now we will get rainfall events through July, but not as much rain as we've seen historically. So this signal indicates that perhaps we will see above average rainfall across the state, across the Midwest, the Corn Belt, moving into summertime, which would be great in terms of when crop is maturing. So if we boil all of those outlooks down and we look at near-term ag weather summaries, our current conditions show us wetter than normal for most of Iowa, with some dryness creeping into that southwest corner of Iowa. And that goes out 30, 60, and 90 days. Out to 90 days, it's about 75% of normal precipitation, which isn't terrible, but we do need to monitor that part of the state in terms of dryness. In terms of temperature, 1 to 3 degrees warmer over the last 30 days, and then even 1 to 2 degrees warmer over the last 60 days. So we've had a good stretch of above average temperatures that, in the absence of precipitation, has allowed drying to occur. We did have, during the first half of March, above average warmth, as I mentioned, but also some windy days and lots of sun. So we did get into a period of time in which soils were drying out, which was good. And then we moved into a more active storm track, which brought us our recent wetness. So if we look at impacts statewide, still wet soils, mostly in that southwest corner, again, 80th percentile. So we are seeing drying there, 20% holding capacity if we look at the modeling. And then even in the southeast corner of the state, we're seeing some drying. Northern part of the state is a little wetter than normal compared to the southern part of the state. We have seen early field work starting, especially in southwestern Iowa. We had a great extension call on Monday, and farmers are getting out into the fields. They're ready to roll. So again, the messaging here is when you see a window evolving in the outlooks in the forecast and you know that your soils can handle it, use those windows to get out into the fields. If your soils are still too wet, we don't want to get into compaction issues and getting that soil compacted so hard that it starts to get us in a bad situation, especially moving into the next season. Soil temperatures still not quite warm enough, still early for planting, and given that soil temperatures have been hovering around 50 degrees in southern Iowa and upper 40s in northern Iowa, we still have some time to go. As we saw in the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day outlooks, we do have a cold snap that's coming, which will tamp down soil temperatures. So we do need, once we get on the other side of that cold snap, hopefully we'll see some warmer temperatures develop as we've seen in the longer term outlooks. And then if we look at the outlook info, elevated chances of cooler conditions into mid-April through the last part of April. We are having a nice warm week this week, but again, that cold snap coming for us at the end of the week and in early next week will give us overnight temperatures below freezing for a few days. So any kind of perennials that we have out, flowers, any shrubs that are putting out blooms, cover those up to protect them from the sub-freezing temperatures. Looking at the quantitative precipitation forecast, the QPF plot I showed you, generally drier than normal conditions moving into the next 7 to 10 days, which would be a welcome change from recent wetness to allow some drying to occur. And finally, our monthly and seasonal outlooks, April, May, June, July, point to warmer conditions, higher probabilities of having above average temperatures. And then again, consistent signal for slightly elevated probabilities of wetter conditions. Finally, and quickly, I just wanted to show you the Climatology Bureau's website. We've had a major revamp at the Iowa Department of Agriculture, and I'm very proud of this site. It's It provides all of the figures that you've seen within this presentation or links to where you can find those figures. We also have an archive of historical weather reports, the monthly reports that myself and my predecessors have published each month. Also, the current monthly weather report is up, which describes weather and climate behavior in the 9 climate divisions across the state, and also statewide averages and any unique events that happen throughout the month. The weekly growing season report, this is issued through USDA NASS, but this is a weekly summary for the last 7 days that I provide to USDA that is then appended to the Iowa Crop Progress and Condition Report that's issued on Monday afternoon after 3 p.m. Then we have the current conditions tab on the website, which outlines soil temperature, soil moisture, drought conditions, recent temperatures, and recent precipitation. So it gives you an idea of conditions on the ground. And then finally, the climate outlooks. These are the short-term outlooks, the 6 to 10 to 8 to 14 day, and then moving out monthly and seasonally. So these will give you an idea of where the outlooks are, what weather we can expect moving forward. And again, using these along with the forecasts and conditions on the ground to give you an idea of when you can get out into the fields to do field work, get planted, and even harvest moving into the fall. So here is a list of online resources that I use on a daily basis. Again, the Climatology Bureau webpage, the Climate Prediction Center outlooks, which are also on the Climatology Bureau page, and then MRCC, Midwest Regional Climate Center, has a lot of useful tools that can be used agriculturally. Also, we have a climate viewer that gives you an idea if we know what the phase of ENSO, El Nino, La Nina is, what kind of temperature and precipitation behavior we can expect in a given month or a given season. And also the Iowa Environmental Mesonet, which is run by Iowa State, also has a lot of good weather data available there. So I would use these as resources. They all have great information that can be used by agricultural stakeholders and farmers. So finally, I want to thank you for sitting through this presentation. I hope you find the information beneficial. I hope you've learned some new tools that you can use moving forward for your own farms, for your own businesses. Here's my email, justin.glisan@iowaagriculture.gov, and my telephone number, and again, the Climatology Bureau website. Please reach out to me if you should ever have any questions. I'm always happy to talk. If I can't get you the information you need, I'll find somebody who can, but I'm here as a resource for you. So please use me as a resource and contact me if you ever have any needs or questions. Thank you.